Hey everyone, and welcome to Ginger Prime. My name's Brian if you're new around here, and if you're a returning subscriber, my soul stone beats for you. That's right, that's what you get for today. A true devotion of love. Thanks so much for checking out today's video. But just for subscribers only, if you want to feel like hitting that free subscribe button, you can always unsubscribe later. Don't know why I'm struggling saying that. If you guys don't like the content here on the channel. This video was sent, this is Josh Drive Hayes. A link to the video. You should honestly go follow Josh. A fantastic content creator. I like a lot of his videos. They tend to be something I usually watch, in the evening when I'm kind of winding down for the day. His voice is like butter. Like, it's so soothing. And today we're going to be reacting to his video called "It Gets Better After 100 Hours." The title itself is super intriguing. I think that's one of the reasons why you guys sent it to me to react to it. So if you guys have more of these videos and you like the reaction content, let me know. I'm not a reaction channel. I don't intend to become one. However, you guys seem to enjoy it, and so we'll keep rolling it as long as you guys want me to react to a specific video. So I'm not hunting these things out. So just that's kind of the reference. If there's a video you guys want me to watch, come hang out on stream, links in the description and more. So let's go ahead and hit play. Let's see what Josh is talking about here today. And let's go all ham in.
If I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. A famous phrase often attributed to Blaise Pascal, Woodrow Wilson, or Oscar Wilde. Whoever wrote it, the meaning remains the same. It takes skill to condense information into the smallest possible packet. Rambling is easy, focusing is hard. This can relate to video games, MMORPG design, especially thanks to the popularity of a phrase I absolutely loathe. It gets good 100 hours in. I've been making MMORPG related YouTube content for years, and variations of "It Gets Good 100 Hours In" are commented on every single video. It doesn't matter if I personally play for 5, 10 or 50 hours, I will always get someone telling me it gets good 100 hours in. So let's discuss this. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. According to YouTube captions, I'm Josh Dryface. Certain video games, especially MMORPGs, are designed to be played for extremely long periods of time, which means the veterans in those games often have hundreds, if not thousands of hours of gameplay time. So when a new player
So to set some context for my experience with Final Fantasy XIV, I think I might have just recently crossed the 5,000 hour mark. I have to go recalculate my values there. And I've definitely been somebody who says, like, it gets better. And when I would say, just based off of what he's already, like, surmising, is that I see that all the time. I see what he's referring to. I think it's a common thing to do one of two things. It's either to diminish or dismiss any critique of the earlier game or the early experience in favor of that it does get better, which most often than not it does, because MMOs are both a community, they're a service, they're obviously a game, but there's something that evolves with time. And more often than not, from a business perspective, it makes more sense to make more content for the people who are there and enjoying your game, rather than necessarily going back and reworking the beginning of the game itself. Final Fantasy XI is a classic example of this. And it gets better. But you have to, like, wonder what it is that is essentially sinking and hooking people, right? We just watched Asmongold's video in which that he said the moment that it really got its hooks in him was with Binding of the Bahamut and with the story when he talks to Midgar Stormer for the first time. Those are two key elements that all of a sudden you're like, holy crap, there is, I get it, right? So anyway, let's see what Josh has to say.
Joins and says, I've got a problem with this system, I don't think this part of the game is as good as it can be, I'm not having a really good time in the early game, the veterans often respond, just play longer, it gets better. And a lot of people have told me, you need to play a game for about 100 hours before you can properly critique it, especially an MMORPG. And I take umbrage against this exact statement, because I think saying you need to play for 100 hours is used as an excuse for poor early game design, or vastly underestimates the amount of free time people actually have to play games. So let's look at both of those things. Before we begin, consider dropping a like on the video, subbing to the channel for more MMO stuff, or ringing the bell so you get all the future notifications. As usual, a massive thank you to all the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel going. More on this at the end. For now, let's begin. There are three main areas I want to cover to explain why the "it gets good 100 hours in" argument is a terrible position for a game to be in and actively makes your game worse. First, the amount of time the average gamer has available to game.
I wonder what he
Second,
thinks.
The importance of the new player experience,
How much time do I have to play games
specifically
every
the
day?
first 2
Gosh, let's
hours,
see.
and finally the implication this has for your narrative focus or lack of for your game's writing. Let's start with the average gamer. Now, when I say average gamer, who do you picture? What lifestyle do they have? And most importantly, how long do you think an average gamer plays games for? Multiple studies have been conducted over the pandemic, a perfect time to study gamers when we're all staying inside gaming. And the state of online gaming is interesting. Reported on by Tech Republic, it was found out the average gamer plays games for 8 hours and 27 minutes a week. That's just over 1 hour and 10 minutes a day.
All right, 8 hours a week, 1 hour, 10 minutes a day. Obviously that's when you're looking at the course of a week, that seems to make a little bit more sense. Honestly, that feels right. That feels right up my alley. With the exception of like bingeable times in history. Like this weekend, for example, my wife took the kids for my birthday and she took them over to her parents' house and literally had all weekend. I think I streamed and played Final Fantasy XIV for like a New World. So I did like an hour and a half, 2 hours of New World's beta, and I did like 4 hours of Final Fantasy XIV. Obviously, that's being the 6 hours of the course of the weekend. Then it seems to make sense. But traditionally, when I sit down to play games, tends to be in like an hour and a half, 2-3 hour spurts. Like it literally, you could go to my YouTube channel and, well, if you're already here, you're here. But if you look at the live stream section, you'll see my average playtime roughly probably anywhere from 3 hours a week up to maybe 8 hours a week. It just really depends on life situations. And that's where, like, honestly, we're only 3 minutes into this video. That's where I literally just wonder when gamers and streamers collide, right? I see a lot of critique leveraged at full-time streamers feeling that they're ruining the game because they literally can play that game for 100 hours a week. And then, you know, the critique is, it's the joke of, I've always seen it. It's like you have the season of grind, you have the season of hype, which is building up to the game. You have the season of grind, in which you're playing the game, and then you have the season of, for lack of a better term, in which that you, with those 3 seasons, that's where you complain that there's nothing left to do, and it's like, oh, I've already poured in 5,000 hours into this game in the last couple of months. Meanwhile, Brian, or insert, like average Joe, like job, and whether you have a family or not, like you got to go to work, you got to pay bills. It's like, man, like I would love to sit back and just play. And especially when you have a family, like got my girls, they're going back to dance, going to hopefully be doing soccer real soon. Weekends have really evolved into family focused, and that's where I want them to be. Like I resigned from the Eighth Right Radio podcast with the fact that it's on Saturdays, and I was like, I can't commit that much time on a Saturday to doing a podcast about this game, namely because like that's when I'm focused in on the family. That's where I need to be. I'm at work, with the exception of this week where I'm covering, and this week and next week where I'm covering Stream for Chris. Like I'm at work, and then when I'm off work, I'm with the kids. We're doing swim. I'm trying to get more time with them on the bicycle. There's some weird guilt that I have, the fact that we're still doing training wheels. Man, being a parent's hard. I definitely say it's the most worthwhile cause that I have been lucky and fortunate to have. And I'm not diminishing anybody who chooses not to have kids or cannot have kids. My wife and I were there. We weren't able to have kids for a long time because she had a brain tumor. It's a long story. Totally. Like I will go ahead back into the video. It's like open up a can of worms.
Average gamer is also a mid-30s professional male and has on average 3 children. Now, when I said picture the average gamer, most people don't picture a 30-something-year-old dad of 3 with an hour a day to game.
Yeah.
Most people picture a younger person with 4 or more hours of gaming time every single night. And this is one of the issues with the 100-hour argument. MMOs need...
I'm average. Got 5 kids. I have a full-time job. I do content creation on the side. Rude here, 53. Got 5 kids, dude. 5 kids. Let's represent. Got my squad, my raid squad I'm building.
Need casual players to survive. They bolster the player base and bring in massive amounts of revenue, but the average casual player only has 1 hour to play. If you tell them a game needs a 100-hour investment to get good, chances are they will leave. Imagine if someone said to you, you must play this video game every moment of your free time for the next third of a year, and if you do that, you might end up having fun.
Pass. Pass. Especially if I'm not invested in the franchise. Final Fantasy as a devil's advocate to his point would be the Final Fantasy, it gets good after 100 hours. I love Final Fantasy. I'm willing to take that risk, right? Like that's where, if I'm already like invested in the franchise, but you sit here and say, like, New World's that risk, right? New World is the fact that I played it and I've enjoyed it and I've loved it. I'm like, yes, I'm excited about this game. But I'm not, I literally in my videos hopefully made it clear, like, guys, note that there's going to be plenty of videos and stuff out there well before I get around to it. But I go on the I chip away mentality. Like, yeah, I'm just going to play when I can play. I'm going to make my progress when I make my progress. I'm going to talk about the game and cover what I like about it, you know? This video should be why we should not keep telling our new players that it gets better in ARR. 1,000% turbulent. Like, that needs to be something that as a part of the narrative goes away. 100% agreed.
100 hours is much more than most people will have free in 1, 2, sometimes even 3 months. So saying that you need to play for 100 hours is unrealistic for the average player. In fact, the average player will give a new game 2 hours before deciding whether they want to carry on or quit. When I was playing Warframe, there is an achievement, play for 2 hours. You know how many people have this achievement on Steam? 40%. Less than half of the people that downloaded Warframe survive for the first 2 hours. You're losing 60% of your potential player base within the first 2 hours. This is how important the new player experience is. This is the vital experience someone needs to have and enjoy to keep playing with your game. Saying play for 100 hours, it gets good then, is pointless if the majority of your player base is going to give up after 2.
Yeah.
Hardcore gamers or veteran players of certain MMOs, ones with hundreds or thousands of hours already invested in, often forget how much of a time sink 100 hours really is for the average person. And I find it extremely telling when players tell me to play their game for at least 100 hours to get to the good bit, but when I ask them if they're willing to play my MMO for 100 hours to try it out, suddenly it's too much of a time investment. You ever notice how the long-time enfranchised players will demand others forgive their game's early design and insist it's worth pushing through, but then they're not willing to push through the early design of others?
I'm guilty.
You can't just click time into another game. You really...
I'm very guilty of that. Like, oh guys, like, it's definitely worth it. It's definitely worth it. You're going to really like it. Hey Brian, are you going to play this other game? No, I'm not.
Realize you're not enjoying it early on and consider quitting within the first 2 hours. That's how new people feel coming to your game. Many game companies refuse to invest in or update the new player experience because that's not the part that they think makes money. The big spenders are the long-time players,
and it's not worth the cost. It like, one of the things within development is, and I've made this case with Final Fantasy XIV before, is there is a substantial cost in actually doing that and redoing that. There's so many trickling down risks, right? Especially the longer that it goes. It's especially the longer that it goes. Oh, your MMO's 10 years old. Let's, Final Fantasy XIV at some point, like, they deleted quests, they did things, but what people were like, oh, they're going to refresh. It's like, guys, you don't get how absolutely terrifying that is. It's terrifying. Like, okay, I have to delete this. Turns out, this system that we relied on years later was baked off that, and it's broke. I run into this a lot, especially when I go into different companies and it's like, You want me to do what? Like, okay, well, when you see the systems that inherent off that, like we're talking about like it would be easier to build it up from the ground up than it would. Now, it always varies, right? But that's just my thought. I saw Ojin also saying 209 hours in the New World beta. Tip of the hat. I put I think 100 so far. It's good.
Higher levels, but those companies often fail to see that you only find and keep new long-term players when people make it through your early game. The first 2 hours of a game are essential. Never mind the suggestion of the first 100. Most people won't find 100 hours free in several months. 100 hours is a crazy amount of free time for the average person to actually find. You can watch the complete series of Firefly in 15 hours. You can watch all of Breaking Bad in 61 hours. All of Game of Thrones in 63. On average, you can finish the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy in 23 hours. The books, not the films. You can play the entirety of The Witcher 3 and all extra content and missions, including every Gwent match, in just over 100 hours. So telling someone to invest as much time as The Witcher would take into an MMO that might get good is a bit of a gamble. In 1995...
So the other side of this as well is that you're not just investing in a game, you're investing in a community. And part of that is a part of the appeal. We've seen MMOs shift into, and Josh had even talked about this back in the day. I didn't cover this video, but shifting into that more single player focused mindset because it's less intimidating. But what people then complain about, what people struggle with in the games themselves is that lack of connection, right? Because whenever it's like your social group is the game itself, and then ultimately, you're like, what am I doing? Like, I'm just sitting here doing this. Like, I can go do that anywhere. So there's another hook to it, and it ends up being the social side of the MMO, as opposed to like a single player game, right? Like if they release The Witcher 3 and says, guys, after 100 hours, this is incredible. Like then how many people would experience it? The stats basically say like less than a fraction of 1%. So it's like, there's so many elements to being played. The lesson here being that have a really good entry point. Have a really good start of the game, have that hook happen immediately. But that's a challenge when it comes to the MMO itself. And that's why consistent updates are that re-invitation to come back into the game, And I think that's one of the things that you see when MMOs compete against things that are very popular, like, obviously Game Pass, like, Battle Royale, like that. Those are easy, simple concepts to get into, and they're fun right away. That's why one of the things I have to say, like, I would love to see MMOs evolve from the rush to endgame to the endgame starts at level 1. And I think there are ways that you go about doing that, but that's a bigger conversation than we have time for in this video.
Entertainers Penn and Teller released the parody video game Desert Bus. In it, you must drive a bus in real time from Tucson to Las Vegas. It takes 8 hours there and 8 hours back, and the bus lists to the right constantly, so you have to actually pay attention. You can't just click drive and wait. It takes 16 hours to finish. Imagine someone saying to you, finish Desert Bus 6 times and then it gets really good. They might be telling the truth. It might get really good. But are you going to actually want to invest all of that time to get to the good bit? Or are you going to go and do something that's good now?
That's so funny.
So the average gamer has just over an hour and 10 minutes a day free to play, and will give your game 2 hours before deciding whether they want to quit or carry on. And you're saying the game needs at least 100 hours. You've lost players far before you get to the 100-hour mark. But let's ask another question. If the game does indeed get good after 100 hours, why? Why do you need 100 hours for the game to get good? What is it doing after the 100-hour mark that it can't be doing before?
I think that's where you see community having a play. You start to feel like you belong, that you have knowledge. I think that's where the sunken cost fallacy could come into play to a degree. I think that's where, as you've played it, as you've experienced it, you've established that sense of like knowledge in the world itself. So it's like you literally put in that time, and then you look back and you're like, oh man, like I've unlocked this feature or that feature or this feature, and not necessarily tied into sunken cost, in which we're talking about monetization, but you've been connected to the community, you have a working knowledge of the game, but then the game itself opens itself up to be easier, especially as it relates to an RPG, in which you want that feeling of progress. You want that feeling of, I started off very weak and now I have strength. I have the ability to sit back and say, great, I can now teleport. I've got money. I've got power. I can, I have ownership to a degree of my character. And I put this time in. What is it, like 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours makes you an expert in that regard? So it's like at some point people cross into those fields, and then it's like, you know it, you have a comfort level.
When a player says a game gets good, they mean it changes. And there's only really 3 ways it can change to affect the enjoyment factor. Either it takes the systems it already has and refines them to such a degree that all the mechanical aspects suddenly make sense and are more enjoyable to use, or it changes everything about the systems and the changes for the better, or it sets up 100 hours worth of context and backstory and now things make sense and the story gets good. All of these have their issues. If your game takes 100 hours for the mechanics in it to become refined and enjoyable enough to be engaging and fun, then why are you actively choosing to keep the opening 100 hours, which you have admitted are subpar? Why on earth?
Despite all the issues that Overwatch has had, despite all the issues that it had with its launch, etc., like one of the really cool things is that you were already starting to mix and match with mods and having that system. That system didn't open up to you later on in the game's life. It literally was like, let's go. So I really enjoyed that. My nose is all clogged up today. Sorry.
Earth would you actively force a new player to slog through the worst part of your game first before letting them get to the good part? A game isn't a job, and the majority of your player base will not want to treat your game as a second job. It's not a trial you must pass, it's a recreational hobby. If you as a game designer have a 100...
There's a counter vision to this, is that when there are gamers who treat it like a job, and I'm not saying that's wrong. Like when we talk about full-time streamers in that regards, like, yeah, that's their job. It's part of it to understand the game. The other part of it's to be entertaining, I guess. Like, I guess there's different categories of that level of content creator. But there is that mindset that, especially if you've done that kind of work, when the games change, it's like you had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to school and back, and then it's like all of a sudden becomes easier. Like there is pushback. Like players themselves are like, wait a minute, like I've done this, you can too. And it falls into the mindset. This is one of the things I say about when people try to think about getting into content creation, is that you need to stop assuming that everybody knows what you know. A lot of gamers assume that everybody's like they are. And that could be a factor of time. It could be a factor of like resources. It could be a factor of anything. But a lot of gamers assume that because I did this, you can too. Or, like because I know this, you know this. And that ends up being just a thing that leads to friction in the discussion. And I see this all the time. But I see this obviously from a position in which that I get fed a lot of opinions in the comment section. So it's always really interesting to me to see how people approach the information that's provided.
Hour-long game, but only the final 2 hours are as good as you can make them and as fun as they can be, then what you have is a 2-hour-long game with 98 hours of intro crap. Trim the excess off and place quality over quantity. MMOs know the early game can suck, which is why they sell boosts, and people get angry at people when they buy boosts, but consider this. Let's redirect your anger toward the game design and not the players, because when long-term players discover new players have the ability to pay to boost through the content, they often get angry. But why? Why anger? Why annoyance? Is it because you feel the playing of the game is a rite of passage, a trial that you completed and therefore others must as well? Because if the early game was legitimately fun and enjoyable and great for you and someone boosts through it, you should feel sorry for them. They missed out on a great experience. You have good memories of it and they don't. What a shame. If the early game is indeed terrible and they boosted and you get annoyed that you had to slog through it and they didn't, that's really malicious. You're admitting the game design is bad but see enduring it as some sort of badge of honor. If the early gameplay isn't good, then you should be lobbying for it to be improved, not forcing other new players to go through it so their suffering matches yours and you feel vindicated. If suffering through the early game crap is a rite of passage for your game's community, don't be surprised when that community doesn't grow and new players quit.
Yeah, so MMOs especially, they rely on the lifeblood of blood of new players coming in, and this is a very weird balance. I call it, it's always funny where I see casual players and hardcore players where they butt when they really actually have a symbiotic relationship. They need each other. Casual players are needed because they're going to be basically the money. They're going to be the ones who help fund the game, as long as they're coming into the game, as long as they're there. Hardcore players are needed because casuals need something to aspire to. A casual's like, hey, what's there to do after 5 hours, 10 hours? Oh, there's endless amounts of things that you can experience in this game. Oh, that's exciting. Like, that means that if I can chip away at this, then I can get that, right? The problem of boosts is a problem of game design. 100%. The problem of boost is the short circuit way of solving that problem without having to go and spend the amount of money and time and effort and resources that it would be to fix the problem. And a lot of that, I think, ties into one of the things I liked about Fantasy XI was the level sync system. It had its issues, especially for hardcore players, because you're not necessarily maybe skilling up or doing certain things that you should be doing at a certain level range. But what it solved is the ability for players to come in and be able to team up with their friends. Nobody likes a game that they have to come into a game, sit back and say, all right, after 100 hours, we can finally team up. And then after that person puts in 100 hours, it's like, oh, you need to put more time in because the theoretical ceiling's higher and there's no benefit, right? If we can sit here and design a game, that's one of the things I want to see with New World, is that there needs to be a reason that end game players, level cap players, team up with lower level players, and a way that kind of makes sense, both in rewarding the high end player, that they're not just sitting here just like, I'm going to give my time up, because a player would, like, especially your friend. But no matter what, there's a level of guilt that some players experience in that they will be like, I don't really want my friend to waste their time. I'll do it, guys. And then they never kind of have that experience of actually playing and enjoying the game themselves and enjoying the time together. And I think essentially there's another side of that, which can be malicious in some ways. And it doesn't mean that it is always malicious. At some point, you're like, it would cost us this much money to fix the beginning of the game and do all these things to kind of do all that, and it'd take a lot of work, a lot of money, or we can just make a lot of money and offer this as an option. That's where within 14 as a context, I think that the new game plus system is very interesting, very good. For those who might not necessarily be in the story, they don't have to be in the story now. And then if the game hooks them, then they can come back and experience that story. But yeah, 14 sells boosts. WoW sells boosts. Games sell boosts. And no matter any which way I look at it, I never like it. It's not that I want people to suffer through like I've suffered. It's selfish to me because it cheapens the experience. It doesn't impact me negatively because a good player can boost and still be a good player. There's an assumption that a player who boosts is going to be a bad player. That is incorrect. I've seen plenty of people who don't boost and who just are garbage at a video game. It's really based off the player themselves. It's nothing to do with the boost itself, but the boost, I think, is something that I would love to see systems brought in, so that isn't a necessity. And then who knows what the unknown, like, you don't know if that ever changed, what monetarily would have to change with the game to keep them out.
The other potential of a game getting good after 100 hours is because the gameplay changes to a new style, or what you're doing in the game switches dramatically. This happens in Terra when your class goes through the Awakening and the gameplay of that class becomes vastly different. So different, in fact, all your training and muscle memory up to this point is now basically useless. If your game does this, why? If you have a game design switch that many players will argue is objectively better, then bring that forward so a new player...
I see chat saying that boosts are typically used for alts. Yeah, I have no issue with that. However, could there be a better system? And that's what I'm asking y'all right now. Like, whether you want to justify the 14 selling boosts, that's literally up for y'all. Like, I still don't like it. Even if it is for alts. What fixes that is data center transfer or data center visit. And that's where 14 is different, is that they bring in these options. Before we had world visit, like you could justify more alts because, oh, if you want to play on this world or that world, but they brought in a system that solved that problem. So you're not buying boosts just so you can exist on one server or the other. You know, so the question of alts, especially in 14 where you can play all jobs on one character, it's justified because you can. You don't have to do that. They're bringing in systems that prevent that, you know, so that prevent the need for that. So then it becomes more optional if you choose to partake in that kind of system. But at the end of the day, it's still there. And I don't think that they need to be. And I hope that with 14 and what they're doing, that essentially becomes that. But note that there is money there. You know, just like with the Fantasia within 14 and within these things, like that's a financial revenue stream. And the question is there a better method, a better market? I'm not going to sit here and say like this is what it's going to be because we don't have all the numbers. It's just speculation at this point. And so for context, so people understand boosting, is that you can in 14 skip the story up to go right into Shadowbringers. And when Endwalker comes out, there'll be new boosts that take you up to the end of Shadowbringers. And so you step into Endwalker. You can't boost to the highest level, but you still have like different level boosts that will take you to that. So in and of itself, that's also a way you can purchase gil with money, is by buying a boost, because it's going to feed you gil and gear in that regards. It's a complex issue. Like, you know, I'm sure there's going to be somebody who's like thinking that this is a negative statement on 14 because they're in love with 14, and I love 14 too. However, like, we got to look at this, and we should be able, as a community, to be able to discuss the pros and cons.
I get a taste of it from the very start. I'm not saying you need to thrust a new player into a chaotic, overwhelming mess of a system from day one. I'm saying if you have decided your advanced players get to experience something awesome, then your new players should be working toward that from the start, not experiencing an inferior system for the first 100 hours. And finally, the idea that hundreds of hours worth.
There's the concept of experiencing an inferior system, but there's also the concept that the casual player might not necessarily be invested or curious enough to explore those systems. And that comes down into how does the game handle that intro to the period. And then obviously the individual, there's got to be a level of personal responsibility here. And I'm not disagreeing with Josh. I'm just saying, like, I see that where it's like, yeah, I see this all the time. It'd be great if 14 did this. And then I happily get a response, oh, it does. And here's where. And that's actually a really good strength of Final Fantasy as a game over like some of the other games I've experienced. But I too have been in that where like maybe I'm just kind of like, yeah, I'm just kind of touching the game, right? Like when he talked about his 2 hours, etc. Like, you know, what does that look like within another MMORPG? And I think that for me, some games, like I'm very excited. I hope New World is a great game for a lot of people, but the thing that is that within the first little bit, like I felt that hook, like boom, right away. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it evolves. So it was like right from the start, it was really cool. Final Fantasy 14, I was actually hooked in 1.0 and had lots of issues, but for me, I was hooked.
Worth of setup is needed for a payoff, such as context or characterization or world building. Skilled world building or emotional setups can be woven into the fabric of gameplay, the audio or the visual mediums, the voiceover lines, or the gameplay itself. If you need 100 hours worth of setup for a payoff, it needs to be the greatest payoff in all of gaming, because you are literally taking more time to set your story up than Breaking Bad takes to tell its entire story. Otherwise, you need to trim down. And as the quote at the start mentioned, take more time to write a shorter letter. So
that's it's really good about his point, bringing that back to the starting point to write a shorter letter. Not to have fluff where it doesn't need to have fluff, but also there's gameplay here. Like when it comes down to the examples that brought in of a game's story versus that of a story for Breaking Bad, etc. Like there isn't a time where the viewer has to go and level up. Are you playing a game for the story or are you playing a game for the gameplay? Like, let's look at that entry point, etc. The gameplay is great. And yeah, maybe the story takes a little longer to build up, but if you actually just condense all the story stuff, are you still actually looking at that same time commitment? But what you get with a game is more than what you get with a movie, is more what you get than a series, etc. Is more than what you get with a book, because like Yeah, like there's no time with Frodo and the Fellowship of the Ring. Oh, we got to go grind out on these mobs so we can make it through this cave. That doesn't exist. And if it did, then why aren't you just watching a movie and not playing a game?
Next time you tell someone it gets good after 100 hours, please remember, if you actually want to attract new players to your game or convince new people to play it, this is a terrible thing to say. You are not helping your own cause, because the average person has just over 1 hour a day to play and will not enjoy the idea of investing 100 hours into something they might not even enjoy. Telling someone it takes 100 hours to get good is basically saying to someone, do you want to dedicate a third of your year to maybe enjoying this? They will, on average, invest 2 hours into your game, and they will leave if it doesn't engage them. If your game takes 100 hours to get good, you are actively saying the first 100 hours is a subpar quality product compared to the rest. So why on earth are you keeping it, and why are you making it the first thing that potential new players to your franchise see? You are putting your worst foot forward. If your game changes after 100 hours in to suddenly get fun, just put that fun at the front and start with it. If you are not able to build an engaging, involved narrative, story or world within 100 hours, sit down with your writing team and condense that down. Telling a new player your game gets good after 100 hours isn't a positive description of your game. You're telling a new player they will need to experience an actively inferior product. They'll have to play through a...
Yeah, Dragon says that in AR, maybe we should change it. It gets better. That is important to the story. Yeah, it's hopefully what you've always heard me say. Like, it gets better. It definitely gets better, which is true. And it gets better versus it gets good is another thing entirely. Better implies that it's good already, and then it just keeps getting better. And that's the experience the player should have. The experience the player should have is it gets better, it's better, it gets better. You don't start here and then it's like, man, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. Like, that's the concept of the comedy versus the tragedy. Comedy might start here but then end here. Tragedy starts here and usually ends down. From a classic theatrical presence.
Pointless section. In some cases, if the game changes in the late game, a completely irrelevant 100 hours, because it won't matter what they do in those anyway. If you need 100 hours to set a narrative up, you need to condense your story down. When you say to someone it gets good after 100 hours, that's not a positive for your game design. So if you want new players to experience your game and stick with it, the next time you're telling someone it gets good 100 hours in, just stop and ask yourself, why? Why do you feel the need to tell this to them? Why do you need to experience 100 hours of low quality game before the good bit happens? And if you're making a game, remember, you've got 2 hours to grab and hold someone's attention, and then remain consistently high quality. If eventually you realise your early game is weak compared to your late game because you as a developer have improved and your quality has increased, change your early game to match your late game's quality. I guarantee you will notice an increase in players and revenue if you do. Sorry this video dragged on longer than it needed to. If I had longer to make it, I would have written a shorter script. Cheers for watching. Another massive thank you to the supporters on Patreon and Twitch who keep the channel alive. You can support from only £1 a month. Check the video description for links to the Patreon, Twitch, Twitter and Discord. And as always, have a great day.
He does a great job. I should remind people, if you guys are interested, I have the join button over on Ginger Prime for just $1 a month. If you want, it helps support. We've been doing some fun things for guides, taking off mid-roll ads based off of those who support over on Ginger Prime. So on the bigger videos that do run longer, they'll hopefully help have the viewing experience. So good job, Josh. I learned something. Doing a better job than I am of sharing out the different options. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share over to Josh Drive Haves. Coming up on 200,000 subscribers, Josh. Well done. And thank you guys here at Ginger Prime, crossing over 45,000 subscribers. Had an original goal of hitting 50,000 this year. And I don't want to sit here and jinx it, but it looks like that might be a reality. So thanks to each and every one of you who've subscribed over on Ginger Prime. Appreciate the support. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Hopefully you guys enjoy the content across all the different ways that we make it. Love you faces. We'll see you soon and take care. I just want to say thank you so much for watching this video, and if you're listening to this voice, you are a special person, and I really do appreciate it. If you feel like watching more, YouTube's got its recommendations for you on the screen. Otherwise, I hope to see you soon. Bye.